Hi and welcome back. Now in this chapter, we are going to see how to deploy a Windows virtual machine in Azure. Now in all resources, you can go ahead and add a new resource for a virtual machine. You could also go on to the virtual machine blade itself or the section for virtual machines, and you can go ahead and add a virtual machine from here as well. So let's go ahead and add a new virtual machine. Now you have to go ahead and ensure that for this virtual machine, you choose what is the subscription. So remember, all of the billing for the resources that you deploy in Azure will actually be billed against the particular subscription. So in Azure, I have a subscription. It's a pay-as-you-go subscription, but I've just given a name for it, a name of test environment. Next, you have to go ahead and ensure that you have a resource group in place. So I'm going to go ahead and choose one of my existing resource groups. So remember, this is a logical grouping for your resources. Next, we can go ahead and give a virtual machine name. Next, we can go ahead and choose the region for the virtual machine. Now, please note that for some users, so let's say you're going ahead and using an Azure free account, you might not be able to create a virtual machine in the region of your choice. So there might be some restrictions in creating the virtual machine in all regions. Even when you are using a pay-as-you-go subscription initially, there might be some restrictions. So just keep a note of this. Since I've been using this subscription for a long time, I don't have that many restrictions when it comes to launching virtual machines in different regions. Now, for now, I will not add anything in terms of the availability options. Now in the image over here, so you have different images that are available. So in the list, I'm going to go ahead and choose Windows Server 2019 Data Center. So they're going to go ahead and use the image to build a Windows Server 2019 Data Center virtual machine. This image is coming from the Azure Marketplace. Now, if you scroll down, you can go ahead and select the size for your virtual machine. Over here, it's giving me a size wherein I get 2 virtual CPUs assigned to the virtual machine and 8 gigs of memory. Over here, it's giving an estimated cost per month just for the compute of this virtual machine, the compute power of this virtual machine. Remember, there are other aspects that are added onto the virtual machine. So for example, your data disks, your disks which are added onto the virtual machine, that is an extra cost. That is an additional cost apart from this $143.81 per month. So this cost which is given over here is only for the compute power that's going to be used by this virtual machine. And this is an estimated cost, assuming that you're going to keep the virtual machine running for the entire month 24/7. Now, if you want, you can actually go ahead and change the size of the virtual machine. So you can go ahead and click on select size. And over here, you'll get different options for the size of the virtual machine. So there are different families for the virtual machine. You have over here, for each size of the virtual machine, you get number of CPUs, you get the amount of RAM, you get the amount of data disk that you can actually assign to the virtual machine. So there are different features available for each size of the virtual machine. For now, I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now next, I have to go ahead and give a username and password. So over here, we are going ahead and mentioning what should be the administrator account credentials that should be set up for the virtual machine. Now please ensure that you understand or you know what is the username and password you are going to be entering, because you're going to use these credentials to log into the virtual machine. Now, please also note that there are some restrictions in what should be the pattern for the password which you enter. So for example, if I just enter a very simple password, so over here, you can see that it's not meeting the requirements for the password in Azure. So please make sure that when you enter password, it actually conforms to these requirements given over here. So I'll go ahead and just re-enter my password. Now over here in the inbound port rules, I'm going to keep everything as it is. But what it's doing over here is it's going ahead and adding something known as a rule to allow traffic onto port 3389. Now by default, traffic is not allowed to flow into the virtual machine. This is kind of a security boundary that is put into place for the virtual machines that you spin up in Azure. You actually have to go ahead and create something known as network security group rules in order to ensure that traffic can flow into the virtual machine. Now, since we're going ahead and creating a Windows virtual machine over here, automatically it's going to go ahead and add a rule to allow traffic on port 3389. This is the remote desktop protocol port for the virtual machine, for the Windows virtual machine. This will then allow us to log into the virtual machine once it is up and running. I'll go on to next for the DIS. So in the wizard, actually, you can see that there is a whole lot of categories that we have to enter first before we can actually go ahead and create the virtual machine. And creating a virtual machine has a lot of aspects to it. So we've gone through the basic screen. Now we have to go through the DIS screen. So in the DIS, we have to go ahead and specify what are the disks that we want to attach onto the virtual machine. So your virtual machine needs to have disks for storage of data, for the storage of the operating system. Now by default, you will have an OS disk that will be assigned to your virtual machine. Now there are different disk types that are available in Azure. So over here, automatically it's giving you Premium SSD. Premium SSD is a high performance based disk. So if you want high performance, you can go ahead and choose the disk type as Premium SSD. Now by default, the disks have encryption already enabled. So that means that when the data is stored on the Azure data center, on the underlying physical infrastructure, it will be encrypted at rest. Now this is only the OS disk. If you want, you can also go ahead and attach additional data disks. So let's say you have an application on your virtual machine. That application needs to store data. You can go ahead and add additional data disks onto the virtual machine for the storage of this data. Please note that you can also add data disks later on. You can add data disks even when the virtual machine is in the running state. Now I'll go on to next for networking. Now in this networking wizard, it's going to go ahead and create a virtual network for you. Now the virtual machine needs to be part of a virtual network. If you already have an existing virtual network in place, you can go ahead and choose that virtual network. Now please note that the virtual network is a separate resource that's going to get created along with this wizard. This virtual network and your virtual machine will be created in the same region. So I'm creating my virtual machine in the Central India region. So this virtual network is also going to get created in the same region. Now for each virtual network, you have something known as a subnet. So a subnet is again a logical separation of the address space of the virtual network. Then we have the public IP address. So the public IP address allows this virtual machine to be reachable from the internet. So let's say that we want to go ahead and connect to this virtual machine. We'll actually connect to the virtual machine via the public IP address. Now, if I scroll down, again, we just have that concept of allowing traffic on port 3389. Now, I'll leave the other settings as they are. Let me go on next for management. Now, in the management screen, the first thing that you have is boot diagnostics. Now, when the machine boots up, if you want to see the information about the machine itself during the boot up process, you can actually go ahead and ensure that boot diagnostics is enabled for the virtual machine. All of that boot diagnostic information is going to be stored in something known as an Azure storage account. Now, we can leave all the other settings as they are. If you want to go ahead and enable automatic shutdown of the virtual machine, you can do that as well. So if you click on over here, you can go ahead and schedule a time every day for the shutdown of the virtual machine. Let's say you want to go ahead and save on compute costs for the virtual machine. You can enable an auto shutdown setting over here. So I'll leave all the other settings as they are. So I'll just disable automatic shutdown. Now I'll go on to next for the advanced. Now I'll leave everything as it is over here. So there's a lot of settings available for this virtual machine. I'll go on to next for the tags. I'll go on to review and create. So actually in the review and create screen, it'll actually perform something known as a validation. It'll just make sure all of the settings are correct. In the review and create screen, you will also see now what is the estimated cost per hour for this entire virtual machine setup. You can go ahead and look at all of the settings for the virtual machine. And once everything is okay, you can go ahead and hit on create. So now you're getting a notification over here that it's going ahead and performing a deployment of the virtual machine. Let's come back once we have the virtual machine in place. Now, once the deployment is complete, you will actually get a notification over here. You can actually directly go on to the resource for the virtual machine. So over here, you're getting the overview screen of the virtual machine. Now, if I go on to all resources, so over here, we can see that there are quite a few resources that get created along with the virtual machine. So we have the virtual machine resource itself. In addition to that, we also have the virtual network. So this is the network that's hosting your virtual machine. You have the storage account. This is used for storing that diagnostic data. You have the public IP address. So the public IP address is actually used, as I mentioned before, to help you connect to the virtual machine or to make the virtual machine reachable from the internet. You have something known as a network security group. So this is used to filter the traffic that goes into your virtual machine or flows out of your virtual machine. It's kind of like having your own firewall for the virtual machine. You have the network interface. So just like you have a network interface for a normal computer, you have a network interface for the virtual machine in Azure. And then finally, you have the OS level disk. So this is a disk that is attached onto your virtual machine. Right, so in this chapter, we have seen how to deploy a Windows virtual machine in Azure.